All right, let's travel back in time, way back, over 2,400 years to ancient China. We're going to meet a man known as the Second Sage, a philosopher whose influence is second only to Confucius himself. His name was Mencius, and he was a thinker, a teacher, and a political advisor whose ideas would go on to shape East Asian thought for thousands of years. But here's the thing. You might picture a sage as some quiet, contemplative guy, but Mencius was a master debater. This quote is probably his most famous, and it's basically him saying, look, I don't argue because I like to, I argue because I have to. He didn't just have ideas, he fought for them, right in the courts of powerful kings during a really chaotic and violent time. So you gotta ask, right? What made this guy tick? What was the source of all that intellectual firepower and that just unwavering idealism? Well, historians point to his education and upbringing, but there's another, much more surprising answer tucked away in an ancient text.
Yep, you heard that right. We're going to look at Mencius through a pretty wild lens, an ancient Chinese astrological analysis. We're basically going to use his birth chart as a kind of blueprint to see if the stars could tell us what kind of man he was going to be. It's a fascinating and definitely unconventional way to get to know a historical giant.
Okay, so to see his life through this lens, we first have to understand the system itself. We've got to break down the celestial code that supposedly mapped out his entire destiny. The system is called Zi Wei Dou Shu, and the easiest way to think of it is as an incredibly detailed celestial map created for the exact moment a person is born. It places a bunch of stars, each with its own specific meaning, into 12 different palaces, which represent all the different areas of your life.
And the most important palace of all, kind of the command center for the whole chart, is the life palace. This is supposed to reveal the absolute core of a person's character, their fundamental personality. And when you look at Mencius's, well, it's pretty revealing.
So in his life palace, we find three major players. First, and this is the big one, is Wen Qu. This is the star of eloquence, of intellect, and, no surprise here, of debate. Then he's got Huagai, which is the star of the lonely idealist, the brilliant but solitary thinker. And finally, there's Bingfu, a star that hints at hidden struggles and setbacks. So right away, you can see a pretty complex picture starting to form. All right, so we've got the blueprint. Now for the real test. Does the building match the plans? Let's see just how well this chart maps onto the actual events of Mencius's life. And when you lay it all out, it's kind of spooky. I mean, check this out. At just 3 years old, his father dies. His chart, it shows a weak father star, which points to separation. Then, his 20s and 30s were a pretty quiet time, mostly teaching. The chart calls this a period of obstructing stars, a time meant for personal growth, not for fame. But then, at 54, bam, he arrives in the state of Qi right as his chart says he's entering a great period for his career. It doesn't last, though. By 61, he leaves, disappointed, and his life ends in what the chart calls a final, challenging phase. The parallels are pretty wild. Okay, so the life events seem to line up. That's one thing. But what about his actual ideas? The philosophy that made him famous. Can we find that written in the stars, too?
These were the revolutionary ideas Mencius was fighting for. He argued that every single person is born good, and that a ruler's job isn't to get more power or money, but to govern with kindness, because the people are the true foundation of a state. In a brutal, war-torn era, this was deeply idealistic stuff. So how did he push these radical ideas? With his greatest weapon, debate. He challenged rivals, he argued in front of kings. And this right here is the most direct link back to his chart. That core skill is the textbook definition of his main star, Wen Qu, the star of eloquence. It's a perfect match. His idealism was also tied into this big idea called heaven's mandate. He truly believed that destiny worked in huge cycles, and he famously said that a truly great unifying king would only come along once every 500 years. He was hoping he'd be the one to find and advise that king. But here's the irony. That exact combination of idealism and eloquence, it kind of made him an outcast. The rulers back then, they wanted military strategy, not moral philosophy. They basically looked at his ideas and said, that's nice, but it's totally impractical. It's naive. And you can see this contrast even more clearly when you put his chart next to Confucius's. Their main stars are completely different. Confucius had Tianliang, the star of a wise, principled teacher. Mencius had Wen Qu, the sharp-tongued debater.
And this difference is mirrored in their lives. Confucius faced real danger and hardship. Mencius traveled around with a big crew. And their whole approach was opposite. Confucius waited for rulers to call him. Mencius went out and actively looked for them. It's like two different sages on two totally different paths, both seemingly laid out in their stars.
So, what do we make of all this? Is a great life just about reading a celestial script that was written for us at birth?
You know, what this ancient analysis really gives us is a compelling story. It's a framework that connects the dots between who Mencius was deep down, his eloquence, his idealism, his need for solitude, and the actual ups and downs of his life. It's like looking at the architect's blueprint after the house has been built and seeing how it all fits together, almost perfectly.
And here is the ultimate irony. In his own lifetime, by the standards of the day, Mencius pretty much failed. The rulers he tried to advise just dismissed him. But that impractical philosophy of his, the one centered on the idea that people are inherently good, it outlasted every single one of them. It went on to become required reading for government officials and helped shape the moral fabric of entire civilizations. Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. If you can see the blueprint of a person's life like this, a mix of natural gifts and pre-written challenges, does that make their achievements seem any less impressive? Or does it make their struggle to live up to that potential, to fight for their ideas against all odds, even more remarkable?